Hi everybody, it's kind of amazing to see so many people here to talk about doing civil rights work and doing ACLU work. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming, and also for the outpouring of support and help that many of you in this room and many of your firms have given, not only to the ACLU, but to the entire legal community in Massachusetts since, November, let's say. It's really, we've seen an uptick. And so what I wanted to talk about today, and the reason why we put this together, is because so many of you came to us after the election, and particularly after President Trump took office, to say we want to help, we want to do things. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to answer that question, because it's crucial. We have so much talent, so many great advocates and lawyers here in Massachusetts, and we want to make sure that we do everything we can to marshal that skill, those resources, to doing the best thing possible. So what I thought I would do, this is just, as Carol says, we think of as the first of several conversations where we're trying to figure out the best way to answer that question. So what I thought I would do is to talk a little bit about the nature of the threats that we're facing, that are the reason why we're sitting here in this room today, the shape of the ACLU response, and then finally some of the early lessons about that response tells all of us about what it will mean to do ACLU work, what it will mean to be a volunteer lawyer or a helper for the ACLU, and what it will mean to challenge the injustices that we're seeing. So in terms of the nature of the threat, that's kind of the easy one, because it's like everything. Think of something that you would consider justice, imagine the opposite of that, and then that is a current problem. So, and I was, so I'm just going to go through a couple, because, time is short and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So, there's, you may have heard that there was an effort to drive non-citizens out of the country. So, and that effort is taking many forms. It's the travel ban, it's profiling, it's denials of due process, it's building a border wall, which is real, I don't know if that has a practical importance, it's more like a monument to the president. It's expanding the scope of what a sanctuary city is, and then trying to harm cities that get that designation. And on and on. And there's discrimination in that. It's not just any non-citizen. If you believe the papers, it's the people that golfer Bernard Langer thinks of as the wrong kinds of non-citizens. It's people who have the wrong kind of skin color, the wrong religion. So that's just immigrants' rights. And then we have reproductive rights, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, the abortion restrictions, religious refusals. We have First Amendment issues. They're ramping up of Islamophobia, going after whistleblowers and not the things that they're blowing the whistle about, eroding privacy, so forth. Then there's LGBT rights, which includes not just the pulling back of federal protection, which we're already seeing, but the increase of transphobia and using that as kind of a lever to hurt other groups. And then we have core civil rights and civil liberties issues. We're going to go from a Department of Justice that polices the police to one that maybe doesn't. We're going to go from one Department of Justice that is concerned about racial justice to one that maybe isn't. And so what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us that really two things. That the scope of this problem is enormous, and that the nature of the injustice is really terrible. I mean, one of the things that really jumped out, I think at all of us about the travel ban, is that the strategy is to hurt people. The strategy is to harm, is to make people so afraid, so worried, that they will not try to even come to this country anymore. And if they're here, they will leave. And that's really what's behind when people say, well, there's no real national security reason. Well, what's the reason then? The reason is to do harm. And I think that's one of the things that struck us. And so it's funny that Carol mentioned my time in the Fourth Circuit. I mean, one of the things that has happened in just the early weeks of the Trump presidency, I think we all understand, certainly the ACLU, we understand that we're in for the fight of our lives. That there hasn't been a moment like this exactly. There have been lots of bad moments in the nation's history. We didn't start off perfect, right? But this is a really unusual series of threats, to have this many threats and this much harm threatened all at once. And so I don't think any of us, and I don't think any ACLU lawyer has exactly responded to this, but we've all in our lives, in our work lives, or our personal lives, encountered this sort of thing, where a huge scale and a huge amount of injustice. And so Carol mentions my time in the Fourth Circuit. I moved to North Carolina with my family in 2008 to go take this job. I got to live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is this amazing, beautiful place, and meet some wonderful people. And the first thing that happens is my first day in the office is the very lovely Southern people who are my new colleagues that go and meet me. And so I didn't really understand it as it was happening because everything was so nice. Everyone was so kind. But at the end of that first meeting, it was like, here are all of your cases. The briefs are all due in like 2 weeks. And it was like a stack of individual appeals that I'd never looked at in a variety of cases where the briefs were all due imminently because they had never had a full-time appellate person before, and it was just like, here, good luck. So that was sort of my experience with the scale of the problem. And then also in terms of injustice, I saw that too. I mean, one of the first cases that was in that stack that I had was for a man named Monroe Herring. And Monroe Herring had just recently at that time been sentenced to a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence for a crack cocaine offense, which was the second offense he'd ever committed in his life, because 20 years before then he'd committed some kind of possession offense. He lived with his mother. He had very little education. He was, by all accounts, a great person who made one mistake. And the reason why he was going to get a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence instead of something lower was that, and I don't say this lightly, it was for one reason and one reason only, which was the prosecutor was mad at his attorney. That was the only reason that he would have got the 20-year sentence and not something lower. And so that's here, good luck with that. And so what I want to say about, what that experience has led me to believe is that you have to be willing to scale up really fast when there's a big threat. And you have to be willing to deal with injustice even when you might lose. And we did. We lost, go and get these cases, and I lost a whole lot of them. And I tried really hard for Mr. Herring. I didn't win his appeal. I got him a post-conviction attorney to handle a motion for him. They didn't win. So when I left North Carolina in 2012 to come here, he was still in prison serving his 20-year sentence. And I thought about him pretty much constantly since then. So that's the sort of, on a much larger scale, that's what we're in right now. And so what I want to say about the shape of the ACLU response is that one good thing about the ACLU is that we can be in every state. If we're not, you have to ramp up. It's like a power grid. The grid is everywhere, but you have to deliver power to it. So on November 1st, we weren't set up to litigate every single one of these issues immediately. But we're ramping up, we're delivering power, and that's why you're here, is that you're crucial to that. And the second is we're prepared to fight injustice even though we're sometimes going to lose. And you have to go into these fights knowing that that's going to happen. And one of the ways that we're going to deliver more power to the grid is through the network of attorneys. So, when we scheduled this first conversation, this was all a little bit theoretical. We knew that we were going to have to do it, but it hadn't started yet. And now we're kind of in it. And the case that you all probably know about, the litigation involving the travel ban, is just a perfect example of using of what it means to work with the community, the legal community, to do ACLU work. And what the lesson that it has taught me, which I don't think I fully appreciated when President Trump was elected, was that we needed to broaden our idea of what it means to be a cooperating attorney with the ACLU, to be a member of this community helping. And because traditionally that's meant, a few things. Maybe you write a memo, maybe you co-counsel on a case, and then you're just litigating a case, and your co-counsel is the ACLU, and it's fun, and we're great. But what I think the travel ban shows is that given the scale and the injustices that we're seeing, something a little bit different was called for, and it kind of happened organically. So the travel ban's announced, it's Saturday, and all over, this is Saturday the 28th, and all over Massachusetts, people are kind of trying to figure out what is happening in Massachusetts. Are people being detained at Logan? What's going on? So my colleague Adriana and LaFi and I are driving to a police department in Massachusetts that sometimes houses detainees from Logan to see if they have any. These very nice police officers are like, no, we haven't seen anybody yet. And there Adriana is driving over the state, and she's, I think at the time, was 11 months pregnant. And she's going to have the baby. That was an estimate. So we didn't have anybody, and I go back, and I'm having 5 guys with my family because I have no life. And then there was a call from Susan Church, immigration attorney, and she says, there are people being detained at Logan, we gotta go. So at that moment, for you Seinfeld fans, I'm gonna tell the story, but I have to not disclose confidential parts, so I'm just gonna yada yada the confidential parts. So yada yada yada, there's a complaint that we file, and there's a hearing that's supposed to start at like 9:30 or 10 at night on a Saturday night, and so there are lawyers who were, and some of them are in this room. I see Josh Daniels and some other folks who were there in the courtroom that night. They're coming from Logan. They're coming from parties out. Even the U.S. Attorney's Office's lawyer, he was coming from engaged parties. He was wearing this very nice sweater. And I was wearing a suit, and everyone thought that was kind of amazing that I was so ready for this. It was like, I'm the only one of you who has no life. So I was in my house where my suits are. That was the magic there. So we go, and everyone is so nice. I mean, the U.S. Marshals, it's Saturday night, and they're like individually checking us in, and they're greeting us. They were so gracious. The court clerk was there, and she was super nice. There are 2 federal judges there to hear this case, so everyone is stepping up. Everyone is doing their job. Everyone is helping. And the courtroom is packed with reporters, with ACLU attorneys. Jessica Ross was there. Adriana had the baby, so she's there. Carl Williams, Laura Rizzo, other ACLU attorneys are there. Some people in this room are there. And they have this hearing, and at just about almost 2 o'clock in the morning, the judges together issue this temporary restraining order, which at the time was the broadest one in the country, halting this proceeding, and it was kind of amazing, and also that not just that it happened, but that at 2 o'clock in the morning we're all like, walking down to the clerk's office, and the clerk opens the clerk's office and prints out a copy of an order so that we can have an order, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And so who's in the courtroom? It's a Goodwin attorney, it's Mintz attorneys, it's immigrants' rights attorneys. And some of them, it turns out, so now we're co-counsel in the case with Susan Church, Carrie Doyle, and Mintz, but it turns out that there's all these other attorneys who are really part of this. There are attorneys in this room who had given me legal memos that I used during that week in preparation for argument, because we had to amend the complaint and deal with a hearing. There are attorneys in this room who I called and said, hey, it turns out, in addition to litigating this case, we're like the global intake hotline for people trying to get to Logan because our temporary restraining order was so good. We're getting calls from all over the world, and people want to get here, and we just can't handle the volume. So Foley Hoag sent us associates every day, just, hi, can you help? And they were amazing. We had attorneys who were giving us legal research, sometimes that we didn't even ask for, that was really helpful in understanding our case. So what all that told me is that the conception that we had of how you litigate cases, at least before Trump, is going to be too narrow for now. And what we need now is that kind of group response to problems, where some folks are going to end up as co-counsel, and some folks are going to be things that we don't have words for yet in the law. I mean, really just partners. And so one of the things I want to say to this group, because obviously you're here because you want to help, is that I hope this is helpful to you in thinking about ways to help. You know, as I look out the room, I think our office has worked with a lot of the people in this room or your firms in the 5 years I've been here. So it's not always going to be the one, that on every case everyone is going to have a role, but over time, everyone, I think, a lot of people will. And it's being ready when your number is called. You know, if I call up and say, could you just send us associates, please? Or could you tell me the answer to this legal question? I mean, if you're able to do that, that's amazing. But it's also kind of calling your own number sometimes. And even if the ACLU is not going to be your partner, you know, there are people who just went to the airport just because they wanted to help. And that turned out to be enormously valuable, to get information, to help people get here safely, to make sure people weren't being detained when they arrived, to make sure that the temporary restraining order had real meaning for people. So that's, I mean, I don't have a clear model that grows out of that, but I think that is enormously comforting, both to know that there's this range of roles that lawyers can play in ACLU work, but not just ACLU work, in the work of civil rights in the Trump era. It doesn't have to be ACLU. There are fantastic organizations in Massachusetts. The Lawyers Committee just filed a great lawsuit with Goodwin on sanctuary cities. MacDole is there in every great criminal case, filing an amicus brief, and I know that they're looking for writers. So it's enormously helpful to know that there are this range of roles, but I also want to say something else. Because you know, we did lose after we won, right? We went in front of Judge Gordon on Friday, and on the Friday after the TRO was issued, and he declined to renew it. And that was very difficult. And what I want to say about that is that there were going to be these losses, and in the context of an effort by the federal government really just to hurt people. And so one of the great things about this community coming together is that if one of the really depressing things about the travel ban was how it harms people, one of the incredibly inspiring things about it was to see people rushing to help. And that's sort of how I explained it to my kids. When we lost, I was feeling down after the Friday loss, and then Segal happened, I felt a little bit better. And my wife and I, we took our kids to Logan on Saturday to show them what this is about. And one of the ways I explained it to my son was, you know Mr. Rogers, right? He has this thing where he says, you know, when bad things happen, when there are people who are in trouble or hurt, there are always helpers. Always. And I said, we're going to go to Logan because I want you to see the helpers. And so, a couple of things about that. There are going to be losses, but some of the greatest landmarks in ACLU history and its history of civil rights are losses. There's the Scopes trial, there's Korematsu. There are losses, but they now stand for being on the right side of history. And we did lose in court on that Friday, but I know what side of history we're on. And I know what side of history that case is on. The other thing is, in the rush of getting all these calls, I stopped listening to my voicemails. Right, but I happened to pick up one in the week following the denial of the renewal of TRO, and it was a call from my former client, Monroe Herring. And he called me not from prison because he had been given a pardon by the president. He's out. He has a painting business. And yada, 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 we had a conversation. But what I'll say is this, I had been trying to figure out a way to help him by, working on a clemency petition while Obama was still president. And it turns out he just was able to file his own using some helpers. And it seems to me that if, Monroe Herring and some unnamed people can file a document that gets heard by the president and granted, that there's a role for all of us to play. And I think that's how I see the lessons of the last few weeks. There was a campaign, and there was a question: is this for real? Does he mean this? And I think the lesson of the last several weeks is these people are not kidding around. They're not kidding. This is not a joke. And the lesson that we're trying to give in response is we're not kidding around either. We're the helpers. We're going to do our job. Thanks.